A lot of important things came out of Chapter 23 of Boruto's 2 Blue Vortex. Hard theories were advanced, exposition was given, battles were advanced. And while all of that is absolutely incredible and made for one of the best chapters of Boruto in a long time, what I can't stop thinking about is all the little things. See, because one of the greatest parts of reading 2 Blue Vortex in real time is the fact that we are slowly spoon-fed crumb after crumb to try and predict what's coming in this incredibly tumultuous future. And Chapter 23 featured some of the biggest crumbs we've ever gotten. Crumbs so large that there is now a legitimate claim to be made that now, not only will all of the new gen Konoha 7 or so be reunited once Team 10 enters the fold and joins Team 7 on Team Boruto's side, but also that when Team 10 does finally come into the equation to join Boruto in the battle against evil, that then and only then will the final battle against the Shinju kick off. But a lot of you who have already read Chapter 23 of 2 Blue Vortex are probably wondering how I've possibly come to this conclusion. I mean, Team 10 is nowhere to be found in Chapter 23, and in a way, you're correct. However, this is where the crumbs come from. And after poring over all of the film tiles that Kashin Koji saw with his new projection of the 10 paths, I feel as though I've been able to crack the code, kind of like Kashin Koji, on what the future beholds for 2 Blue Vortex. But what does it have to do with Inogen? What does it have to do with Shikadai? And what does it have to do with Himawari? Is Inogen gonna ally himself with Boruto, Kashin Koji, and the rest of Team Boruto? Is he truly in Kashin Koji's hideout in the one frame that he's shown, or is he somewhere else? And what does all of this have to do with Araya and Gaara? Well, today we're going to be answering all those questions and a whole lot more, because today we're talking Konoha's Genin reunited. But before we get to reuniting anybody, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you guys are looking for one additional NC Hammer 23 video a week, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. We're on to the written part of the tuning exams. So, Nick, are you really dedicating an entire video to the fact that Inogen showed up in one panel of Chapter 23 of 2 Blue Vortex? Well, not really. See, here's the thing. While Inogen showing up in Kashin Koji's projections of the future using his new update from the 10 paths is probably the oddest thing we saw on any of the panels we got from the 10 paths projections, as Inogen seemingly standing in what appears to be one of Orochimaru's defunct lairs is pretty much the weirdest thing we could have possibly been shown from any iteration of the future. Today, we're not just talking about that one panel of the future that Inogen appeared in. See, while Inogen's panel is the thread we want to pull on, when we start pulling away at this thread, we realize it's a whole lot longer than we originally anticipated. See, because here's the thing. Well, the idea of Inogen being in Orochimaru's lair may seem like a throwaway idea to some of you. A lot of things, and I mean a lot of things, would need to happen for Inogen to show up in a Orochimaru lair. And the reason I'm saying an Orochimaru lair is because I'm not entirely sure that it is the Orochimaru lair that Kashin, Koji, and Boruto are currently using as a hideout. See, as it currently stands in 2 Blue Vortex, there are two very important defunct Orochimaru lairs right now. There is the lair that Kashin, Koji, and Boruto are currently using as a hideout, and additionally the Orochimaru lair that Gaara and Shinji are in. And that is something that a lot, and I mean a lot of people are forgetting. See, because, well, obviously, yes, when you think of Orochimaru lairs in Boruto, you think of Kashin, Koji, and Boruto. What a lot of people forget is that while Matsuri was hunting down Boruto's trail for Jura, she went to a defunct lair of Orochimaru that had Boruto's chakra signature in it, because Kashin, Koji, and Boruto have been hopping around from defunct lair to defunct lair to try and keep people like Code and now the Shinju off their trail. And thus, when following Boruto's trail brought Matsuri to the Land of Wind, then a defunct Orochimaru lair in the Land of Wind, that's where Gaara, Araya, Yodo, and Shinji faced off against Matsuri and summarily lost. And thus, Inogen being in a very characteristic cave that appears to have snake-like appendages or stalagmites or pillars or whatever you want to call them, doesn't necessarily mean that somehow, someway, Inogen ended up in Kashin, Koji, and Boruto's cave. It could mean technically that he's at Gaara and Shinki's location. And these two possibilities require very distinct and very different things to happen for either of them to play out. And while I hate to sound like a contrarian here, that's not true. I love to sound like a contrarian. While the majority of people are looking at this panel and believing that Inogen is somehow, someway gonna end up in Kashin Koji's lair with Boruto maybe, I'm going the other way. See, based off the very, and I mean very limited information that I have access to from chapter 23, I would say that it doesn't actually look like Inujin is inside of Kashin, Koji, and Boruto's lair. See, from the couple of times that we've seen the inside of the lair that Kashin, Koji, and Boruto are currently inhabiting, while we have seen things that are very characteristic of an Orochimaru lair, like the scale-covered pillars that keep the cave from collapsing upon itself, that are very clearly shown in the 10 pass projection that has Inujin in them, all the times that we see Kashin, Koji, or Boruto in their lair, all of those pillars are in perfect shape. That is to say that none of the pillars are broken. If we see a pillar, it's not only connected to the floor, but also the ceiling. And thus the lair that Kashin, Koji, and Boruto are currently inhabiting seems like one of Orochimaru's newer, less destroyed lairs. However, the same cannot be said for where Gaara, Shinki, Araya, and Yodo battled against Matsuri. See, because in the brief couple of images we got from that lair where that fight happened, we saw that a pretty vast majority of those snake scale pillars were actually destroyed, making them appear more stalagmite or stalactite in nature. That is to say that they were either only connected to the ceiling or the floor. And those are the kind of pillars that are depicted behind Inujin in these 10 pass predictions. But what does that mean? Well, it seems somehow, someway, Inujin is seemingly injured while in the lair that Gaara and Shinki are currently in some version of comatose in. But why and how? The last time that we saw Inujin, he was unconscious in chapter 14, being healed by Sakura from an apparent hole in the chest. And while Sakura said that it was almost hard to believe that he had been run through in the first place, implying that he was doing much better than he probably should have been, he was still unconscious 9 chapters ago. So why would a boy who almost just died in combat against the Shinju be sent back into combat against them just 9 chapters later?
Well, Nick, that's the 10 pass. We don't know how far into the future that prediction of Inujin in that cave is.
And you're right, there is no way for us to prove that this projection of Inujin battling inside of one of Orochimaru's caves is going to happen anytime soon. However, rather interestingly, in this panel where Kashin Koji was getting this new update from the 10 paths, we saw Boruto laid out on the ground face down with plumes of smoke around him and Jura holding the right side of his face. 2 things that happened later on in this chapter, as Boruto was laid out flat on his stomach by Jura, and then Jura was stabbed through the back of the head and through his eye by Kawaki. And thus this seems to imply that everything that Kashin Koji was seeing using this new update from the 10 paths was going to happen in pretty short order. But that leaves 2 panels from this new 10 paths update that need to happen relatively soon, which is an injured Inujin in one of Orochimaru's lairs and Himawari seemingly in the middle of some combat. Because in the panel where she's depicted, there's not only smoke plumes, but also debris in the air. But Himawari also being involved in some iteration of combat in the near future is not the only evidence we have to try and suss out what's going on with Inujin, because I don't believe that Inujin will be the only member of Team 10 involved in combat in the near future. And while that might sound a little bit like a no duh, why would Inujin be sent into combat by himself? You can actually see in a little sliver of a 10 pass prediction to the left of Inujin, somebody wearing a striped jumpsuit, and the stripe runs down their arm. And the only person in the 2 Blue Vortex universe who wears a striped jumpsuit with a stripe running down their sleeve is Shikadai. And thus, not only are Inujin and Himawari being shown in this 10 pass prediction, but also Shikadai is. And considering the events of the 10 paths seemingly pan out as a kind of movie to Kashin Koji, on account of the fact that the events are A, shown in a literal film roll, and B, we can see in the image where Jura is holding his face that in the panel to the left of Jura holding his face is another panel of Jura, as we can see in the little sliver of the 10 paths prediction, to the left of Jura holding his right eye is also Jura's sleeve, or cloak thing. Then it seems as though that in the panel next to Inujin battling in one of Orochimaru's lairs shows Shikadai, and thus Shikadai is also seemingly involved in whatever combat Inujin is involved in. And thus it seems as though all of Team 10, because let's just assume that Chocho is also there, makes it to one of Orochimaru's lairs. And like we stated earlier, there's 2 possibilities. One that I believe to be more likely is that somehow, some way, and for some reason, Team 10 ends up where Gaara and Shinki are currently entombed. So let's answer why they would end up there. I mean, honestly, if you think about it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Ryu, who's really the only person who wanted anything to do with this lair in the first place, is dead, and currently exists as a soul thorn in Araya's hand. And therefore, the idea that a fight would start in this lair where Orochimaru and Shinki currently is doesn't make all that much sense. Jura's battling against Kawaki and Boruto. Matsuru's Soul Thorn is with Konohamaru, and Ryu's Soul Thorn is with Oreya. The only possible threats that would maybe, possibly, but most likely not, step in to continue this battle between the Shinju and Konoha are either the Bug Shinju or Hidari, neither of whom have any motivation to try and stop Oreya from putting the Soul Thorn back into Shinki and untrifying him. And thus Oreya should be able to get to Shinki pretty unscathed. He knows where to go, he's been there previously. He'll shove the Soul Thorn into Shinki's chest or the tree, Shinki will be freed, Shinki will free Gaara, and they'll head back to the hidden sand, and everyone's happy. How does Inojin get there and get injured? Well, we don't know what's gonna happen to Shinki after he's freed from his divine tree. Well, yes, I guess the somewhat natural conclusion to come to here is that he'll just be freed from the tree, and after being freed from the tree, he'll be back to being regular Shinki. However, what's important to note here is that Shinki has been being bathed in the power of the divine tree in the Ten Tails, and that the key to unlock him is seemingly the soul and consciousness of Ryu. There's a fair to decent chance that the Shinki who's gonna be released from this divine tree isn't necessarily gonna be the Shinki we all love and remember. He could be a feral version of himself. He could be a blend of the personalities of Ryu and Shinki, who's gonna take advantage of the fact that Oreya is now alone and out of chakra, and therefore capitalize on this opportunity to take him out. And here's the thing, the stage is kind of set for this exact kind of thing to happen. It was revealed that Shinki and Oreya often trained together, and therefore Oreya was given a sword by Shinki, imbued with magnet release that allowed for Oreya to kind of counteract the iron sand of Shinki. And therefore, for a moment there, it appeared as though Oreya was gonna hold serve in the battle against Ryu, as Oreya was able to counteract the magnet release and iron sand of Ryu, putting him in a somewhat sticky spot. That was, of course, until Ryu summoned a bunch of claw grimes, had one of the swords get lodged in a claw grime, and then had that claw grime and fly away to somewhere else. And thus Oreya is now currently without his lodestone sword, the only thing that would give Oreya even a minor chance of winning in combat against a possibly new and improved Shinki. And here's the thing, there's absolutely a universe where Shikamaru understands that the freeing of anybody from these divine trees is gonna bring along some dangers. I mean, nobody really knows what's gonna happen when these people are freed. I mean, maybe Kashin Koji, because the Tenpats, understands what's gonna happen, but if he understands what's gonna happen, he's in very open communication with Shikamaru through Ada, and therefore Shikamaru would know. And thus there's a possibility that Shikamaru also sent out Team 10 to assist in this battle against Ryu and Matsuri. And this would make a fair amount of sense. Team 10 has been set up as the enemies of the Shinju. I mean, most specifically Jura, but still the enemy of the Shinju, as they battled against Jura to protect Himawari, who's seemingly kind of an extension of Team 10. And now, while this is technically what got Inojin punched through the stomach with some wood release, there's a possibility that somehow, some way, the healing factor of Kurama that was implemented onto Inojin's body by Himawari was able to shake even a little bit the control of omnipotence over Inojin, which possibly could have incentivized him, after waking up from being healed by the likes of Sakura, to want to help Boruto. And while this is a stretch of a statement that really has no basis in fact, what is a fact is that Inojin, immediately upon being reawoken from his coma, would probably try to figure out what had happened to Himawari, because mind you, he was hopping into combat against Shura to protect Himawari, and he would find out from whoever he asked what happened to Himawari that Himawari was saved by Boruto. Ties into the fact that Inojin is pretty clearly in love with Himawari, feel about that as you will, and that Inojin and Himawari are most likely being set up to be together in the far-off future, and that Himawari already stated to Team 10, Inojin very much included, that she didn't believe that Boruto could have killed her father, and that Boruto is actually most likely misunderstood and therefore not actually evil, and all of those feelings accumulating together would be enough to most likely swing Inojin closer to the camp of Team Boruto than any other member of Team 10. Ties into the fact that Inojin has some of the highest mobility capability in the Boruto universe, with his Super Beast art scroll that allowed for him to outpace Jura in the air until Jura shot him down. And if Inojin was to awake from his coma, hear that Boruto had saved Himawari, realized that Boruto wasn't evil, and heard that Boruto and Team 7 were currently battling against Jura, the guy who had just punched a hole in his chest and tried to kill Himawari, there's an okay chance that Inojin and Team 10 would go to fly into combat to help Team 7 in this endeavor against the Shinju. And their actions wouldn't even necessarily have to be rogue ones. But see, because Shikamaru is Team Boruto, he's openly collaborating with Ada and Kashin Koji and therefore Boruto, but he doesn't have as many allies in Konoha as he wishes he did, as Ino fairly recently basically just told Shikamaru to shove it and that she wasn't going to help Boruto any longer, which is a sentiment that only got doubled when she saw that her son had been laid up by an attack from the Shinju. And therefore, if Shikamaru was going to send anybody to help in the battle against the Shinju to help Boruto in this ongoing war, it would have to be members of the younger generation who are willing to give Boruto a chance. On top of this, Ino, stepping out of a prominent role in the Konoha safety sphere, leaves an opening for a Yamanaka who's been trying to become a better censor, aka Enojin. And therefore, this 10-pass prediction that we're seeing from Kashin Koji could be the first sign that Enojin is actually going to be filling the void left by his mother. And thus, in an ironic twist of fate, if Shikamaru were to trust Team 10 to go to the Land of Wind and collect Gaara, Shinki, and possibly Boruto and bring them all back to Konoha, or at least bring them to safety, Shikamaru in a way would be having a full circle moment with the Sasuke retrieval arc, where he was put in charge of a retrieval mission of an important asset of Konoha, where he had to lead a team of Genin in an incredibly pressing and dangerous time in Konoha's history. Except now Shikamaru is the Hokage sending off Genin, presumably led by Shikadai, to bring important assets back to Konoha in a time of incredible danger in Konoha's history. And thus Team 10 has to battle against this new and maybe improved iteration of Shinki as they try to use their collective Fuinjutsu abilities to seal away Shinki temporarily so that he can either be brought back to the Hidden Sand or the Hidden Leaf to either be deprogrammed or until he calms down enough to realize that he's back in his own body. Now, while there is also the possibility that Team 10 just has to battle against a bunch of Claw Grimes or maybe even the Bug Shinju, who's come to retrieve Ryu's Soul Thorn because even though he feels nothing for Ryu, he's still a valuable teammate. The important takeaway from all of this is that Team 10 is going to be sent to the Land of Wind as the second prong of a two-pronged attack to bring back incredibly important assets that are currently hanging out in the Land of Wind back to either Konoha or to the Hidden Sand. But I concede this isn't the only possibility. See, because this is not Jura, Kawaki, and Boruto's last fight. The second time that we see Kashin Koji dealing with the update that he's getting from his 10 paths in chapter 23, we see that at some point in the near and or distant future, that Jura returns to the root layer where the Shinju are all hiding out. We also see, seemingly, you can't really tell all that well, that in this either near or distant future, his right eye is healed. And this isn't all that crazy of an idea. I mean, Hidaru was able to reconstitute his body from being pierced through the abdomen with the Chidori, and then he was able to be completely regrown when brought back to the lair by all of the roots of the root layer. And therefore, if Jura is able to get back to the Shinju hideout, he is gonna heal, and all the damage that he's incurred from either Boruto or Kawaki is gonna be gone. And it looks as though, at least based off the 10 pass predictions that we're seeing from Kashin Koji, that is going to happen. We also possibly see the Bug Shinju in Konoha, and we see a face-off between Hidari and Sarada, which I guess we probably all saw coming. But the most important takeaway from all of this is that this is not the final battle against Jura. There are bigger, badder, more final battles that are coming against the Shinju later on in Two Blue Vortex. However, a lot of the people that need to be involved in those battles are not currently well suited to win those battles. Sure, you can make the argument that Boruto and Kawaki right now possess the power to cumulatively take on Jura, and Daemon undoubtedly smacks the flavor out of the Bug Shinju's mouth as he tries to take on Ada. However, Sarada is still incredibly new to Ramangekyo Sharingan, and therefore probably needs some kind of training arc. See, that's the thing. Two Blue Vortex has been pedal to the metal since the first chapter. Sure, we've seen some absolutely crazy power feats, but we haven't necessarily seen anybody train. Yes, there was a time skip. Yes, we were told that during that time skip everyone got stronger, but a clear power deficit exists between the Shinju and the Konoha Shinobi. And thus the future that we're seeing unfurl with Enojin in one of Orochimaru's lairs could come from one of two things. Either this is simply an image of Enojin training really hard with somebody else, like Oreya or Shinki or Boruto or Sarada or Shikadai or Chocho, and this is done in Kashin Koji's lair, A, because Shikamaru is openly working with Kashin Koji, and therefore the idea that he would send Genin to Kashin Koji so that they could all get stronger for the upcoming battle against the Shinju is not all that crazy, or B, because Team 10 is sent to the Land of Wind, and after recollecting Shinki and Gaara and Boruto, everybody heads back to Kashin Koji and Boruto's lair together. This fight also doesn't necessarily have to come from training, as this fight that Enojin is depicted in being in, while it could possibly be while he's in Kashin Koji or Boruto's lair, could be from a real, actual fight against the Shinju. See, because here's the thing. Himawari being very clearly depicted in combat has me on my toes, because there's really no reason for Himawari to be in combat. Jura wants to consume Himawari, yes, because Himawari has the chakra signature of Naruto, who Jura wanted to consume originally. However, Himawari has been established as safe within the confines of Konoha because Jura doesn't want to destroy Konoha, and therefore really the only way that Himawari would ever be involved in combat in the future is if she left Konoha, which would be a really bad decision by whoever sent her out of Konoha, unless there would have to be a pretty compelling reason to send Himawari anywhere not within the confines of Konoha's walls. And I think that's where that image of the Bug Shinju walking down what appears to be a city street comes from. See, because, well, yeah, Jura's not gonna invade Konoha. I don't think the bug Shinju cares. And thus, when all-out war in the streets of Konoha becomes a legitimate possibility, I do believe that there's a fair to decent chance that Himawari is either sent to Boruto and Kashin Koji to train, or simply just swept up in the nonsense of the battle that unfurls in Konoha. But if Himawari is sent away to Kashin Koji and Boruto to train, as the idea that Jura's not gonna hunt her down because she's within the confines of Konoha's walls is probably only gonna work for so long, this could possibly explain how Inujin ends up in what appears to be a rather intense battle in one of Orochimaru's lairs, as Jura and the rest of the Shinju eventually stumble upon their location looking to kill Himawari and Boruto, and thus all of Team Boruto, which is now the Konoha 7. Sarada, Mitsuki, Boruto, Shikadai, Chocho, Inujin, and Himawari have to work together to battle against Hidari and Jura. But then again, what do I know? I'm speculating from a couple of panels. What do you guys think these future sight predictions from Kashin Koji mean? Let me know in the comments below, and while I goes down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go rest my voice.